So I've recently started toying around with the idea of politically identifying as a celebrationist, and it surfaced a lot of thoughts for me about why I think white leftists, white activists, obviously accelerationists are another bag of cats, don't really integrate into liberation and movement work very well. I find that a lot of white leftists take a really academic approach to their personal politics and politics in general. And one of the ways I see that is by essentially removing a lot of radical Black movements from spiritual contexts, essentially rationalizing Black movement building and liberation work. I think the Haitian Revolution is like a really great example of this, right? Like when we talk about the Haitian Revolution, we often talk about it as one of the first labor strikes, right? Of really in history, or one of the earliest ones. And we don't often talk about the fact that the entire revolution itself was grounded in voodoo, in traditional practices, and was catalyzed in ritual. In the same way that people are really reticent and hesitant to talk about MLK and his movement as a Christian movement, right? And that's not to say we're pigeonholing here. That's not to say that there isn't overlap in those Venn diagrams. But I find there to be something really funny about how white leftists specifically want to remove the concept of anything that isn't academic, that isn't logical and rational from these conversations, right? To separate the spiritualism or the religious components from activism, from liberation work in general, and fundamentally from political identity, right? Often identifying politically with any sort of spiritualism, with any sort of spiritual practice, undermines your legitimacy in a lot of white leftist spaces. And as a Black activist myself, and as a liberation worker, I have been a frontline activist for 10 years of my life, and I've worked in a myriad of different roles and capacities over the course of the last 15 years. I think this is where a lot of the distrust comes from, where even white leftists can be seen as accelerationists because there isn't a clear path in terms of understanding their ideology as it is pro-life. And I don't mean pro-life in the sense of reproductive rights. I mean supporting joy, in service of joy, liberation, safety, and human beings, right? Our right to thrive, our right to safety, our right to joy and abundance. Something I think about a lot is the ancestral components of liberation, right? Getting ourselves free and the ways that we can decolonize and do belief system deconstruction in order to serve ancestral purpose. And the fact of the matter is, and I have to remind myself of this often, the majority of the reason our bloodline survived wasn't because people managed to be wickedly smart or wickedly warlike. It was hair braiding and love making and ass shaking and joy seeking and cooking that made a world that was worth occupying during some of the most horrific events in history, and that was also worth fighting for, as in coming out the other side and being willing to rebuild in the image that we all know that we deserve. Right, operating in personal politics and in politics in general with the assumption and the understanding that everyone has the right to live. I don't want this to just come off as some like flat critique of white leftists or go into that sort of beat to death argument that white people lack culture or lack soul or rhythm. But I do want to invite people into like a fuller way of imagining politics and liberation. Because honestly, it's quite unsettling the way this sort of clinicalized, spirituality stripped form of leftism often operates or ends up in these other extremes, right? With this sense of bloodlust, with this excitement, this foaming at the mouth for violent revolution without regard for who ultimately pays the deepest, hardest cost of that, which is already the most vulnerable people on this planet, even if it is in service of long-term liberation. And there's more tools than just being right or servicing pat on the backtivism and making sure that you are impossible to critique or that you are able to move through the correct circles to be able to make decisions or have the social capital that you want, right? We often, when we think about revolution, think about the end or we think about the glory, but it's a lot of time occupying really undesirable circumstances, material, emotional, and beyond, economic. Movements aren't just theories, right? They're ritual, they're prayer. Their songs, their dreams. And I think one of the hardest things about this, especially as it comes to digital activists or people that have a large platform, is that people tend to attach onto ideologues or pedestaled people without really thinking about whether their ideology or their analysis actually serves community, actually serves liberation, right? A question that I ask myself a lot is, does this make me feel smart or does this make me feel motivated in the direction of mutuality, of care, of better understanding and serving the world that I want to see, the world that I want to occupy, the world that I want to be real? I'm seeing in so many different directions over the past couple months, people have had a really hard time recognizing community versus adversary, right? Whether it's the Madeline Pendleton of it all, what happened with Drew Afualo and an old clip surfacing, or even what happened with Jasmine, right? I think people go to spaces and feel validated and feel smart and feel like they have the resource and the tool to sharpen the ideas that they already have, right? To reinforce the ideologies that they already have, and don't necessarily critique whether or not when they leave that space, when they leave that creator, when they walk away with that reinforcement, whether that makes them a better asset to community or whether they're actually performing another type of more insidious individualism. And whether, frankly, their political ideology exists to create a hierarchy that allows them to dunk on other people. I'm not in any way saying that theory isn't important or that there isn't an incredible amount of value in having an academic understanding of the history of movement, of liberation, and of revolution. But I am saying there's a pause that needs to happen in the way that we cherry pick and tend to over rationalize, clinicize, sterilize, and strip some of the more fundamental human centered components from this work and from how we develop our core belief systems around it in general.